Welcome to Fright Club. The first rule of Fright Club is, you do talk about Fright Club, based on true events. It is a truth universally acknowledged among those who study the darker recesses of human experience that certain places, by virtue of their isolation, their proximity to the eternal sea, or some quality more ineffable still, become repositories for events which defy rational explanation. Upon such a place, a desolate lighthouse along the Maine coast, our narrative now turns its unwavering gaze. What follows is drawn from fragmentary records, a scholar's abandoned journal, and testimony from those few souls who dwelt near enough to witness, if witness is indeed the word, what transpired there. Subscribe if you wish to venture further into such territories. Share where you listen if you dare name your location. Now, in darkness, attend. The lighthouse keeper's daughter. The storm struck without warning. I arrived at Sorrowmere Point under skies the color of old bruises, the wind thick with salt, and the stench of things drowned and best forgotten. The lighthouse stood on its promontory like something recoiling from memory, weathered stone leaning slightly, as if the weight of what it had witnessed had become unbearable. I am Dr. Samuel Winters, late of the university, now reduced to cataloging abandoned lighthouses for historical societies. The position came as relief, if I am honest. My previous post ended badly. A colleague's wife, an indiscretion I prefer not to detail. The work offered what I needed most, income and isolation in equal measure. Mrs. Coldwell handed me the iron key with no ceremony. 3 months, she said, her face betraying nothing. Catalog everything. The society wants to convert it to a museum, but first we need to know what remains. What remained, I would discover, was far more than rusted tools and rotting rope. The keeper's cottage crouched beside the tower, its windows boarded against a century of storms. Mrs. Coldwell had warned the accommodations would be Spartan. She had not mentioned the oppressive silence that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves, nor the way shadows pooled in corners even at midday, resistant to lamplight. She also had not mentioned, perhaps did not know, that the lighthouse's last keeper vanished in 1861, under circumstances the records labeled merely as unexplained. I spent 2 days in mundane documentation. The tower rose through 5 levels, connected by spiral stairs whose iron steps rang hollow beneath my boots. The sound echoed strangely, as if the space were larger than its dimensions suggested, or as if some other tread answered my own, always one rotation behind. On the 3rd day, as the storm I mentioned began its assault, I found the hidden compartment. The keeper's quarters on the 3rd level consisted of a circular room with a narrow bed, a writing desk, and a small iron stove. The wallpaper had peeled in long strips, revealing stone beneath like flesh parting from bone. Something about the desk drew my eye, an asymmetry that offended my cataloger's instincts. The bottom drawer stuck, then jerked open with a sound like a gasp. Empty, I thought, until I noticed it seemed too shallow. I rapped my knuckles against the bottom, hollow. Inside the false bottom, a leather journal spotted with age and salt damp, letters tied with yellowed ribbon, a daguerreotype in a tarnished frame, a locket containing hair pale as moonlight. I should have taken these directly to Mrs. Coldwell. Protocol demanded it. But the storm was rising, the road likely impassable, and I needed to examine the items to catalog them properly. These were my rational justifications. The truth? From the moment I lifted that daguerreotype and looked upon the face captured there, I was lost. She was beautiful, but the word fails utterly. Her face was heart-shaped, her eyes enormous even in that primitive photograph, dark and deep as wells. Pale hair fell around her shoulders. She wore a simple white dress, and at her throat, a shell on a ribbon. But it was her expression that seized me. She smiled, but it was a smile of such profound sadness it seemed to contain knowledge of every sorrow that had ever been. Her eyes looked not at the camera, but through it, through time itself, directly at me. On the back, in careful script, Eliza Wren, 1843-1861, beloved wife, lost to the sea, but never to my heart. The journal's first page bore an inscription. The personal journal of Thomas Wren, keeper of Sorrowmere Light, commenced January 1st, 1860. May God have mercy on my soul and grant me the strength to endure what must be endured. An odd beginning for a lighthouse log. But as I read, I understood this was no mere record of lamp maintenance. January 4th, 1860. She appeared on the beach 3 days after my arrival. I had descended the cliff path to examine the tide pools. The day was clear, the sea glassy with calm. I saw her before she saw me, standing at the water's edge, bare feet, pale dress moving in the breeze. Her hair, I had never seen such hair, pale as sea foam, falling to her waist. She was singing. Her voice carried like the call of some seabird, beautiful and lonely and strange. When she turned, she did not startle. She simply looked at me with those enormous dark eyes and smiled, the smile of recognition, as if she had been waiting. "You're the new lighthouse keeper," she said. "I am. Thomas Wren." "I know. I'm Eliza. I walk this beach every day." Every day? The beach was treacherous, the weather unpredictable. Every day. I belong to the sea, you see, or perhaps the sea belongs to me. She laughed, and the sound was like bells, like water over stones. In that moment, I fell in love, not gradually, immediately, totally, irrevocably, like falling from a great height, like drowning. I set the journal down, hands trembling. Outside the storm raged, rain lashing the windows, wind howling through gaps in the stone, with a sound almost like voices, almost like singing. I should have stopped, should have closed the journal, weathered the storm, delivered everything to Mrs. Coldwell in the morning. But I was caught, ensnared by Thomas's words, by the image of Eliza at the sea's edge. I read for hours as Thomas chronicled his courtship. They met daily, on the beach, in a tide-carved cave where walls sparkled with salt crystals, in meadows above the cliffs. His entries grew fevered as his love deepened. He described her in terms reserved for the divine, his angel, his salvation. In her presence, he wrote, the world transfigured, ordinary things becoming luminous. But darker notes crept in. The villagers avoided Eliza, crossed themselves when she passed. When Thomas asked her father for permission to court her, the old fisherman wept. She's not for the likes of living men. The sea will have her in the end. The sea always does. The village priest refused to marry them, said Eliza had never been baptized, that there was something not wholly of this earth about her. They are jealous, Thomas wrote. They cannot bear the sight of perfect love. Or perhaps they are afraid, for our love is vast and all-consuming as the ocean itself. On May 15th, 1860, they married themselves in the sea cave, no witnesses but stars and waves. We stood as the tide rose around our ankles. Eliza wore white, flowers woven in her hair, sea lavender and beach roses. She had no ring, so she took a shell from the beach, threaded it on a ribbon, tied it at her throat. I need no church, she said. The sea is my witness, and the stars, and you. I pledge myself to you, Thomas Wren, in this life and whatever may come after. My soul to yours, as the tide to the moon. I promised to love her beyond death, beyond reason, beyond the end of all things, that nothing would separate us. When we kissed, I tasted salt on her lips. The sea, I thought. But later, I wondered if it might have been tears. The next several pages were blank. When the writing resumed, the hand was shakier, desperate. June 20th, 1860. 5 weeks of perfect happiness, but lately she has grown distant. She stares at the sea for hours, wakes at night and walks to the window, lips moving as if in conversation with someone I cannot see. Yesterday she wept. They're calling me home, Thomas. The angels or the demons or whatever dwells beneath the waves. They're jealous of our love. They want me back. I told her no one was calling, that she was mine, and I would never let her go. But I felt a chill. I remembered the fisherman's warning, the priest's refusal, the way villagers crossed themselves. What if there is something not wholly of this earth about my Eliza? I turned the page. June 21st, the summer solstice. A single sentence, letters so large they nearly tore through the paper. She is gone. The pages that followed were water-stained, ink running as if the journal itself had wept. Through fragmented entries, I pieced together the story. On solstice night, Eliza insisted on walking the beach one final time. Calm weather, glassy sea, full moon. Thomas wanted to accompany her, but she refused. I need to say goodbye, she told me. I'll return before dawn. Wait for me. Keep the light burning. I watched her descend. She reached the beach and stood at the water's edge, just as on the day we met. And then, the handwriting deteriorated to barely legible scrawl. The sea rose up, not a wave, not a natural tide. It rose like a living thing, like reaching arms, and took her. I saw the water close over her head. I ran, God help me, I ran, down the path across the beach, into the water, but I could not find her. The sea was calm again, flat as a mirror, and she was gone. I searched all night, dove until my lungs burned, called until my voice gave out, but the sea had taken her. At dawn, I found her body on the rocks below the lighthouse. She looked as if sleeping, pale hair spread like a halo. No mark on her, no sign of violence. She had simply drowned, under calm seas, on a clear night, in water shallow enough to stand. The villagers said it was mercy, that the sea had claimed what was always its own. The priest prayed over her, but would not bury her in consecrated ground. They laid her in a tomb on the cliff. A stone vault her father built with trembling hands while I stood helpless. Before they sealed it, I sat with her body. Her skin was cold but not stiff. She wore that same sad smile from the day we met. I kissed her lips one final time. I swear upon everything sacred, I felt her kiss me back. I closed the journal. My heart pounded. The storm had intensified, wind shrieking around the tower like voices in agony or ecstasy. Impossible to tell the difference. I looked again at the daguerreotype. In the flickering lamplight, her expression seemed to shift, as if trying to tell me something across the gulf of years. That was when I heard it, beneath the storm's howl, faint but distinct, singing, a woman's voice, wordless and beautiful and unutterably lonely, coming from somewhere below, from the beach, from the rocks where Eliza's body was found, or from the tomb itself. I knew I should ignore it, tell myself it was wind, an auditory illusion born of exhaustion and too much reading of a dead man's obsession. But I was already standing, already moving toward the window, drawn the way Thomas had been drawn to Eliza that first day. Through the storm, I could barely see the beach, but I could have sworn, I saw a figure standing at the water's edge, pale dress whipping in wind, pale hair streaming like sea foam, looking up at the lighthouse, looking up at me, smiling. I stepped back, breath coming in gasps. This was madness. There was no one on the beach, just storm, isolation, the weight of Thomas's grief pressing down through decades. I was a rational man, a scholar, a man of science. I did not believe in ghosts. But when I returned to the desk, I found something that had not been there before. A single black feather, long and elegant, lying across Eliza's image, and beneath it, in the dust on the desk, written in letters formed by what could only have been a fingertip. Keep reading. I did not sleep that night. The feather lay on the desk, black and iridescent, undeniably real. I had touched it, felt the smoothness of its veins, the delicate structure of its shaft. Not exhaustion, not imagination. Real. The words in the dust. Keep reading. I had stared at them until my breath disturbed the particles, but the letters remained deliberate, clear. Eventually I wiped them away with my sleeve, an act that felt transgressive, like erasing a message from God or from the damned. As hours crawled toward dawn, I read by lamplight while the storm drummed its relentless rhythm against stone. Somewhere in that percussion, I still heard singing. Thomas's entries following Eliza's death documented a descent into grief so profound it seemed to have its own gravity. He stopped maintaining the lighthouse. Ships nearly foundered before the maritime authority sent inspectors. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping in any conventional sense. His existence contracted to a single obsession, the tomb on the cliff where Eliza lay. July 3rd, 1861. I sleep at her grave now. The villagers think me mad. Perhaps they're right. I cannot bear the distance between lighthouse and tomb. I bring blankets, lie against the stone. In the deepest night, I swear I hear her breathing. The stone is cold, but beneath it, warmth, as if something living pulses within. Last night I heard her voice clearly, not wind, not imagination, her voice speaking my name. "Thomas," she said, filled with such longing I wept. "I am so cold, so alone. Why did you let them bury me in the dark?" I tried to answer, but no sound came. I could only press my hands against stone and weep. "Open the tomb," she whispered. "Let me see the stars. I am not dead, Thomas. Death is not what they told us. I am here, waiting, always waiting." A chill ran down my spine. The rational explanation was clear, grief-induced hallucination. But there was something in the specificity, the detail, that made dismissal difficult. July 15th, 1861. I have begun excavating. I work only at night, using stolen tools. The mortar is old, crumbles easily. I have removed 3 stones, creating a gap large enough to reach inside. I have not yet had the courage. What will I find? Her body in whatever decay 3 weeks have wrought. But what if I am right and rationality wrong? What if the villagers spoke truth, that she was never fully of this world, never fully subject to its laws? Tonight I will reach inside. Tonight I will know. 2 days later, the handwriting had changed, looser, almost ecstatic. July 17th, 1861. She is beautiful. She is perfect. She is unchanged. I reached in with trembling hands, expecting corruption, but my fingers found fabric, her dress still crisp, and then skin. Skin as smooth and cool as in life. When I touched it, it seemed to warm beneath my palm. Her hand moved. clasped mine. I nearly fainted. She held my hand with surprising strength, fingers intertwining, and I felt her pulse, faint, slow, unmistakable, or perhaps my own heart pounding so hard it animated everything I touched. "Thomas," she said, her voice clear as if she stood beside me. "You found me. You didn't leave me alone in the dark." I tried to pull away the remaining stones, to free her completely. She stopped me. "Not yet," she whispered. "I am not ready. The transformation is not complete. But come each night, hold my hand, speak to me. Your love sustains me now, allows me to endure the changing. Promise you will come." I promised. God help me, I promised. I set the journal down and paced the circular room. The lamp had burned low, dawn graying the windows. Exhaustion weighed on me, but sleep seemed impossible. If Thomas was insane, these were merely documents of dissolution. But if not, if there was even the smallest kernel of truth, then I was reading evidence of love that had refused death's boundary, had reached across and found it permeable. I picked up the letters, untied the yellowed ribbon, spread them across the desk, perhaps 20 in total, written on paper now brittle with age. The first, dated April 1860, was in delicate script, quite different from Thomas's bold hand. "My dearest Thomas, I write though we saw each other only hours ago. But there are truths requiring the distance of pen and paper to be spoken. I am not what you think, not the simple fisherman's daughter. I am those things, but also something else, something nameless in the language of men. My mother was human, but my father, my true father, not the kind fisherman who raised me, came from the depths. He was beautiful and terrible, and my mother loved him, though she knew she shouldn't, knew the price would be high. She died, bearing me. The villagers called it childbed fever, but she told the midwife truth in her final moments. The sea was claiming its tithe. She had loved something forbidden, and her daughter would be caught between worlds, never fully belonging to either. I have always known. I have always felt the ocean calling, pulling at something essential in my nature. When I am in the water, I can breathe beneath the waves. I hear voices in the deep places, singing songs older than language. They are my kin, Thomas, and they are jealous. I tell you because our love has grown beyond what I thought possible. And you deserve to know what you're binding yourself to. If you wish to end our courtship, I will understand. I will disappear into the sea from which I came. But if you choose to love me still, knowing what I am, know that our love will be tested. The sea does not give up its own easily. Tell me tomorrow that you still love me, or tell me goodbye. Yours in this world and whatever lies beneath. Eliza. My hands shook. If genuine, if Eliza had truly written this, then everything Thomas described was not delusion, but documentation. She had warned him, given him escape. He had chosen to love her anyway. Subsequent letters traced their courtship into summer. Eliza's handwriting grew more urgent, desperate. She wrote of feeling the sea's pull strengthen, of hearing voices more clearly, of fearing she could not resist much longer. The final letter was not from Eliza to Thomas, but Thomas to Eliza, written on coarser paper, handwriting barely controlled. My Eliza, they have sealed your tomb, but I know you are not dead. I know you hear me through the stones, feel my hands when I touch the vault. You told me not to follow, but you must have known I would. A love like ours does not end because one heart stops beating. We are bound by vows spoken in sacred darkness, by promises transcending mortal and immortal. I have touched your hand in the tomb, I know you are changing, becoming something new, something between flesh and spirit, land and sea. When transformation completes, we will be together again. I will wait. I will tend the light and keep vigil and wait for your return. And if you do not return, if this is truly death, then I will follow you into whatever darkness you inhabit. This I swear, we will not be separated, not by death, not by the sea, not by the vast and jealous powers that seek to keep us apart. Wait for me, my love. I am coming. Undated, but I suspected it was written shortly before Thomas's disappearance. It read like farewell, like a man on the edge of an irrevocable decision. I retied the letters carefully. My hands trembled. The sun had risen fully, and the storm had finally passed, leaving behind profound and unsettling quiet. I should have left then, should have packed these artifacts and delivered them to Mrs. Coldwell, requested transfer to some less haunted project. Everything rational screamed at me to flee before I became as obsessed as Thomas. But I could not leave. The story was not finished. Thomas and Eliza's tale had not ended with his disappearance or her entombment. It was still unfolding, waiting for its final chapter, and somehow, impossibly, I was meant to be part of it. I descended to the ground floor and stepped outside for the first time since the storm began. The air was crisp, washed clean, and the sea had calmed to gentle swells. Seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries sharp and lonely. I knew where I needed to go. The tomb on the cliff, overlooking the beach where Thomas first saw Eliza. I needed to see it myself, needed to stand before it, and what? A stone vault sealed for more than a century, containing nothing but bones and dust. That was what reason dictated. But reason had become a small voice, easily drowned by the louder urgency pulling me toward the cliff path. The path was treacherous after the storm. Rocks had shifted, earth eroded, leaving gaps I had to leap with my heart in my throat. But I pressed on, driven by compulsion I could neither explain nor resist. 20 minutes brought me to a small plateau. When I emerged from the narrow defile and saw it, I stopped, breath-catching. The tomb was exactly as Thomas described, rough-cut granite blocks fitted without mortar, topped with a massive slab of darker stone, perhaps 6 feet long, 4 feet wide, 3 feet high, just large enough for a human body. No inscription, no decoration, but someone had been there recently. Fresh flowers lay across the entrance, sea lavender and beach roses, exactly as Eliza had worn at her wedding. The petals were vibrant, untouched by decay. They could not have been more than a day old. And the tomb had been disturbed. 3 stones on the side facing the sea had been removed, creating a gap perhaps 18 inches wide. Through it, I could see darkness, absolute and impenetrable. I should not have approached. Every survival instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run to the lighthouse and leave this cursed place. But my feet carried me forward until I stood before the gap. The darkness within seemed to pulse, to breathe. Cold air emanated from it, carrying salt water and something else, that same faint lavender I had smelled opening Thomas's journal. "Hello?" My voice sounded absurdly normal. "Is anyone there?" Silence. Then, from within the darkness, a sound that froze my blood. Laughter. A woman's laughter, soft and sad and impossibly beautiful. "Not anyone," a voice said. The voice from the storm. The voice that had haunted dreams I'd never had. Not anymore, but not nothing either. I am what remains when love refuses to end. What Thomas made me with his devotion and refusal to let go. "Eliza?" I whispered, knowing it was impossible. Yes, the voice said, and no. I was Eliza once. Now I am something else, something that waits, something that remembers, something that loves still, though love has become strange and terrible. I knelt before the gap, hands trembling as I reached toward darkness. I should have been terrified, should have been running. But all I felt was profound, inexplicable longing, a sense of recognition that made no sense but felt truer than anything I had ever experienced. Show yourself, I said. Are you certain? What you see may break your mind, change you in ways you cannot predict. Thomas was warned. He looked anyway. It cost him everything. I'm certain, I said, though I was not certain at all. The darkness shifted. Something pale moved in those depths. A hand emerged, slender, delicate, skin so pale it seemed to glow with faint luminescence. The fingers were long, graceful, nails like small shells. It reached toward me, palm up, offering. Take my hand, Eliza's voice said. Touch me and know I am real. That love does not end with death. That some promises, once spoken, can never be broken. Every survival instinct screamed at me to pull back, to flee, but I had come too far, read too much, invested too deeply to turn away. I placed my hand in hers. Her skin was cold, cold as deep water, cold as the grave, but not the cold of death, the cold of transformation, of something that had passed beyond ordinary boundaries and become something new. Her fingers closed around mine with surprising strength, and I felt everything at once. Thomas's love for Eliza, overwhelming in its intensity. Eliza's longing for the sea, her divided nature, her terror and ecstasy as water claimed her. The long years in the tomb, not dead but not alive, caught in suspension while something fundamental changed in her being. And underneath it all, a love so vast it had refused death, had bent nature's laws to its will, had created something that should not exist but did anyway. I gasped, tried to pull away. Her grip tightened. Now you understand, she said softly. Now you know what Thomas knew. Love like this does not end, cannot end. It persists beyond death, beyond reason, beyond the dissolution of the universe itself. And it demands, oh, how it demands. What does it demand? I managed to ask. Everything, she said. Absolutely everything. As it demanded everything from Thomas, as it demanded everything from me. She released my hand. I fell backward onto stone, gasping. The cold that had entered through her touch was spreading through my body, settling into my bones, my blood. I could feel it changing something fundamental, rewriting something essential. Go back to the lighthouse, Eliza said, her voice fading as if moving into vast distances. Read the rest of Thomas's journal, learn how the story ends, and then decide. Will you be as Thomas was? Will you love unto death and beyond? Or will you choose the safer path, the ordinary life? The small existence of those who love moderately and never touch the divine or the damned? The darkness within the tomb grew absolute. I knew she had withdrawn into whatever depths she inhabited. I lay on cold stone for a long time, staring at the sky where clouds gathered again, where seabirds circled, their cries lonely and strange. Finally, when my legs would carry me, I stood and made my way back to the lighthouse. The flowers on the tomb I left undisturbed. They were not meant for me. But as I descended the cliff path, I carried with me the cold of Eliza's touch, the impossible knowledge of what I had felt when our hands met, and the terrible certainty that my life, my ordinary, rational, carefully constructed life, was over. Whatever came next would be extraordinary and terrible and utterly, irreversibly transformative. I could hardly wait. I did not return immediately to the lighthouse. Instead, I walked the beach, retracing steps Thomas and Eliza must have taken countless times. The sand was dark and wet from the storm, and my boot prints filled slowly with seawater, as if the ocean were erasing my presence. The cold from Eliza's touch had not faded. It had intensified, spreading from my hand up my arm into my chest, taking residence near my heart. Not painful, but profoundly unsettling, a constant reminder that I had crossed some threshold, made contact with something existing outside normal boundaries. I found the sea cave Thomas had mentioned. The entrance was partially hidden by tumbled rocks, but at low tide there was space to slip inside. I hesitated at the threshold. To enter would commit me further to this impossible narrative, step me deeper into the story that had consumed Thomas Wren. But I was already committed. From the moment I opened that hidden compartment, from the instant I looked upon Eliza's daguerreotype, I had been caught. The only question was how deeply I would allow myself to become entangled. I entered. Inside, the sea's sound amplified and distorted, becoming almost musical, almost like voices in harmony. The walls sparkled with salt crystals, catching what little light penetrated and scattering it in tiny rainbow prisms. The cave narrowed as it went, ending in a space barely large enough for two people. This was where they had married themselves. Here, with tide rising around their ankles, they had spoken vows no church would sanctify, bound themselves with promises exceeding ordinary matrimony. I knelt in the sand and touched the wall where crystals grew thickest. The stone was cold and wet. I could feel the pulse of the sea through it, the eternal rhythm that had witnessed their vows and would continue long after every trace of their existence had been erased. "What did you promise her?" I asked the empty air, asking Thomas, though he had been gone for more than a century. No answer came. Just waves, dripping water, distant seabirds. But as I knelt there, I felt something shift in the air, a presence not quite physical, but undeniably there. And then I heard it, faint but distinct, like memory of sound rather than sound itself. Two voices overlapping, speaking in unison. "My soul to yours, as the tide to the moon, in this life and whatever may come after. Nothing shall separate us, not death, not distance, not the end of all things." The words echoed long after the voices faded, reverberating from crystalline walls until they became part of the fundamental acoustics, woven into the cave's structure. These were the vows they had spoken, the promises that created the bond between them. Some promises, once spoken with sufficient conviction, acquire weight transcending the symbolic. They become real in ways ordinary language never achieves. They carve themselves into reality's fabric and demand to be honored, regardless of cost. I left the cave and continued walking until I found myself at the base of the cliff path. The tide was rising. Soon, this stretch would be underwater. I could see water lines from previous high tides marked on rocks, dark stains showing how far the ocean regularly encroached. But there was another mark higher up, a line of pale mineral deposits forming a distinct boundary, perhaps 20 feet above normal high tide marks. Far too high for any ordinary tide, even during severe storms. Unless the tide that rose to claim Eliza had not been ordinary. Unless, as Thomas described, the sea had risen like a living thing, reaching far beyond normal limits to take back what it considered its own. I climbed the path again, driven by the same compulsion that had driven Thomas. When I reached the plateau, I found the flowers from earlier already wilting. But even as I watched, new flowers appeared, not growing from ground, but materializing on the tomb's stone surface, fresh and vibrant, as if placed by invisible hands. "Eliza?" I called softly. "Are you there?" The air grew perceptibly colder, that same soft, sad laughter. "Always," her voice said, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I'm always here. Where else would I be? This tomb is my chrysalis, my transformation chamber. I cannot leave until the changing is complete." "When will that be?" "Soon," she said. "Very soon now. I can feel it approaching, like the turn of the tide. When it comes, when I finally emerge from this stone cocoon, I will be something new, something between flesh and spirit, between human and something else." "And Thomas?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Where is Thomas?" Silence, broken only by wind and distant waves. When Eliza finally spoke, her voice was heavy with sorrow, and something that might have been guilt. "Thomas made a choice. On the last night of the year, exactly 6 months after they sealed me here, he came and offered himself, said if I could not return to the living world, he would join me in whatever realm I inhabited, said our vows were eternal, and if eternity required him to abandon his flesh and life, he would do so gladly." "And you let him?" Eliza's laugh was bitter. "Let him? I begged him not to. I told him what awaited was neither death nor life, but something strange and terrible between. That he would be caught as I was caught, suspended in transformation that might never complete. But he would not listen. True love makes us deaf to reason, blind to consequence." "What happened?" "He walked into the sea at midnight during winter's highest tide. Walked until water closed over his head, then kept walking. Down into depths where light does not reach, down where boundaries between worlds grow thin. And there, in that lightless place, he transformed, became something other than human, something that could exist in the spaces between. Is he still there? In the sea?" "He is everywhere and nowhere," Eliza said, "in the waves that crash against these rocks, in the mist that rises on cold mornings, in the wind that sings through the lighthouse tower. He gave up individual existence to become part of something larger, something vast and eternal. Sometimes I can feel him near me, sense his presence mixing with mine, as if we are two currents in the same ocean, distinct, but inseparable." I sat heavily on stone, overwhelmed. Thomas had not simply died. He had chosen to dissolve himself, to give up everything, making him an individual consciousness in order to remain connected to Eliza, the ultimate sacrifice, the absolute commitment. It was also, quite possibly, madness. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Why lead me to the journal, the letters? Why reveal yourself at all?" "Because I am lonely," Eliza said simply, and the naked vulnerability in those words struck like a physical blow. "I have been here for more than a century, caught between states, neither living nor dead. Thomas visits in wind and waves, but he is diffuse now, scattered. He cannot speak as he once did, cannot hold or comfort me. And I am so tired of being alone. What do you want from me?" "I want you to understand. I want someone to know our love was real. Not delusion or obsession, but something true and beautiful and worth the terrible price we paid. I want you to finish Thomas's journal, to complete the documentation, and then..." She paused. I heard something in that pause that made my heart race. "And then?" I prompted. "And then I want you to make a choice, the same choice Thomas made, to love completely without reservation or fear. to commit so fully you transcend ordinary boundaries, or to walk away, return to your safe life, and forget you ever came to this place. You're asking me to throw myself into the sea? To give up my life for someone I've never even met? No, Eliza said, infinitely sad. I'm not asking you to love me, Samuel Winters. That would be cruel, and despite what I've become, I am not cruel. I'm asking you to find what Thomas and I found. To seek that kind of love for yourself, whoever it might be with, to refuse half measures and compromises, to demand the absolute, the eternal, the transcendent. And if I can't find that, then you will live an ordinary life, content, perhaps, comfortable, safe, but you will never know what Thomas and I knew. Never touch the divine or the damned. You will live and die and be forgotten, like everyone who chose safety over sublimity. I stood and walked to the plateau's edge, looking out over the sea. The sun was beginning to set, painting water in shades of gold and crimson. For a moment, I could see how beautiful this place must have seemed to Thomas and Eliza, how stark cliffs and angry sea could become the setting for love exceeding all normal bounds. I need to finish reading the journal, I said. I need to know the rest. Yes, Eliza agreed. Read it all. Learn what Thomas learned in his final months. Then come back and tell me what you've decided. Decided about what? About whether you will help me. Whether you will be the one to finally set me free. Before I could ask what she meant, the presence withdrew, leaving me alone with wind and dying flowers and growing darkness. I stood watching the last light fade, watching stars emerge in deepening blue. Finally, when it was too dark to safely navigate the cliff path, I made my way carefully back. As I climbed, I could have sworn I saw light moving in the lighthouse's upper windows, as if someone were tending a lamp that no longer existed. When I reached the lighthouse, I went directly to the third-floor room. Everything was as I'd left it. Daguerreotype on the desk, letters tied with ribbon, journal lying open. But there was something new. Another black feather across the journal, and written in the dust beside it, in that same careful script, "Finish the story." I picked up the journal with hands that trembled only slightly. The cold Eliza's touch had left in my chest had spread throughout my body, had become something I was almost comfortable with, like a companion walking beside me, rather than an invader. I began to read the entries I had skipped, the final months of Thomas Wren's documented existence. The entry, dated August 1st, 1861, began simply. I have made a discovery that changes everything. The villagers know more than they have said. There is a history here, a pattern of which Eliza and I are merely the latest iteration. I have found records in the church basement, records the priest either doesn't know about or has deliberately hidden. This place, Sorrowmere Point, is a threshold. The boundary between land and sea here is not merely geographical, but metaphysical. Something dwells in the deep water, something ancient and powerful, and it has been claiming brides as long as humans have lived along this coast. The women it chooses are always the same, pale-haired, dark-eyed, beautiful in ways that seem not quite human. They are its daughters, born of unions between its kind and mortal women, and when they come of age, it calls them home. But some resist. They fall in love with mortal men, as Eliza fell in love with me, and they try to remain on land. And always, always, the sea reclaims them. Except, and this gives me hope, some are not truly dead. Some exist in a state between life and death, caught in transformation from human to whatever the sea wants them to become. And if the transformation can be interrupted at the right moment, they can return, not as they were, but as something new, something that can exist in both worlds. My heart pounded. If Thomas's discovery was true, then Eliza's transformation was not unique. There might be a way to bring her back, to complete the process, allowing her to emerge from the tomb. But at what cost? September 21st, 1861, the autumn equinox. I attempted the ritual tonight, offering my blood at the tomb, speaking the words from the old records. For a moment, I felt Eliza's presence surge toward me, felt her consciousness pressing against the boundaries separating us. She spoke my name. But it was not enough. The transformation is too far advanced. Blood alone cannot bridge this gap. I know what I must do. If I want Eliza to return, if I want her transformation to complete in a way that brings her back rather than pulling her deeper into the abyss, I must join her in the deep. I must become the bridge, the pathway, the anchor she can use to pull herself back. It means giving up everything. My body, mind, individual existence. I will dissolve into the ocean, become part of its vast consciousness, and there I will wait for her, calling her back, guiding her toward light. The final entry was dated December 31st, 1861. The handwriting was barely controlled, words running together. Tonight, the highest tide of winter, the darkest night of the year, the moment when boundaries are thinnest. I have prepared everything, said my goodbyes to the lighthouse, to the few possessions I leave behind, to the life I lived as Thomas Wren. I am not afraid, or rather, I am terrified, but my love is stronger than my fear. I go willingly, joyfully even, knowing that in dissolving myself, I create the possibility for Eliza's return. If you are reading this, whoever you are, whenever you are, know that what I do for love. Not the pale shadow most people call by that name, but the real thing, the absolute commitment, the willing sacrifice of everything for the sake of the beloved. Some will call this madness. Let them. I have touched something they will never touch, known something they will never know. I go to her now. I become the sea, the wind, the eternal rhythm of waves against stone, and when she finally emerges from her chrysalis, I will be there to welcome her, not as I was, but as I will be, everything and nothing, forever and never, hers absolutely and without reservation. The remaining pages were blank, waiting for continuation that would never come. I closed the book and sat in silence as the full weight settled over me. Thomas had chosen to destroy himself, to give up his individual existence, believing his sacrifice would help Eliza complete her transformation. Whether it had worked, whether Eliza had been able to use his dissolution as a bridge back toward the world, I did not know. But I knew now what Eliza meant when she said I could help set her free. She needed someone to complete what Thomas had begun, to provide the final element necessary for her transformation to finish. The question was, would I do it? Would I sacrifice myself for a love that was not even mine? For a woman I had never known except through photographs and century-old letters? The rational answer was obvious. Leave immediately, report what I'd found, return to ordinary life and forget I ever came to Sorrowmere Point. But as I sat there with Eliza's image watching me from the desk and the cold of her touch spreading through my veins, I realized the rational answer was no longer available. I had gone too far, learned too much, felt too deeply the echo of Thomas and Eliza's impossible love. I stood and walked to the window, looking out over the dark sea. The moon had risen fully, painting a silver path across the water. As I watched, I saw movement in that path, a figure, pale and indistinct, walking on the surface as if water were solid ground. The figure raised one hand in what might have been greeting or farewell, and I heard Eliza's voice carried on the wind. "Come to me tomorrow, Samuel Winters. Come to the tomb at midnight, when the moon is full and the tide is high. I will tell you what I need, and then you will decide." The figure faded into mist, and I was left alone with my thoughts and fears and the terrible knowledge that tomorrow, at midnight, I would have to make a choice determining not just my own fate, but perhaps Eliza's as well. I did not sleep. I sat at the desk and read through Thomas's journal again, searching for some clue, some hint of what Eliza needed that Thomas had been unable to provide. But the journal offered no answers, only questions. Only the documentation of a love so absolute, it had refused every boundary, every limitation, every law of nature and reason. As dawn approached, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge the truth I had been avoiding. I was falling in love with her. Not in the ordinary way, but through something deeper and stranger. Falling in love with the idea of love itself, with the possibility that such absolute commitment could exist. Whether that made me worthy to help her, or simply meant I was as mad as Thomas had been, I could not say. But I knew that when midnight came, I would go to the tomb. I would listen to what Eliza had to say. And then I would decide whether love was worth the ultimate sacrifice, or whether some boundaries should never be crossed, no matter how beautiful the prize waiting on the other side. The day preceding midnight passed with the quality of a fever dream. I attempted to catalog the lighthouse's remaining artifacts, but my hands shook, rendering my writing illegible. Instead, I found myself drawn to the window again and again, watching the sea move through its tidal cycles, watching for signs of what the night would bring. The ocean seemed different now, not merely water and salt, but something conscious, something vast and ancient and hungry. I could feel it watching me, waiting with the patience only something immortal can possess. Around noon, I walked down to the beach one final time. The beach was deserted as always. I had seen no other visitors since arriving. No fishermen, no tourists, no locals. As if the place itself repelled ordinary human presence, I walked the crescent's entire length and found nothing unusual. But as I turned back, I noticed something. Footprints in the sand ahead of me, fresh and clear despite the fact I had just walked this stretch and seen no one. Small, delicate, bare feet, leaving impressions too shallow to be natural, as if whoever made them barely touched the ground. They led from the water's edge to the cliff base, then simply stopped. I followed them to where they ended and found myself before a narrow cleft in the cliff face, barely wide enough to slip through sideways. I had walked past this spot multiple times without noticing it. The rock's angle created an optical illusion, making the opening nearly invisible. I squeezed through and found myself in a chamber perhaps 10 feet across and 8 feet high. Light filtered down from cracks above, creating shifting patterns on the walls. And there, covering every surface, were carvings, crude but unmistakable. Images of women with flowing hair and enormous eyes, always shone at the boundary between land and sea. Some stood at the water's edge with arms raised in supplication or surrender. Others were depicted half-submerged, their lower bodies transforming into something not quite fish, not quite human. Scattered among these images were symbols I didn't recognize, geometric patterns and spirals that seemed to pulse when I looked at them directly, but it was the names that made my breath catch. Carved alongside the images in various hands and states of weathering were dozens of names, women's names, each followed by a date. Eleanor Marsh, 1723, Sarah Coldwell, 1756, Catherine Wren, 1801, Eliza Wren, 1861, and many more, stretching back to dates barely legible, stone-worn smooth by centuries of salt air and water. This was the record Thomas had mentioned, the evidence that Eliza was not unique, that this pattern had been repeating as long as humans had lived here. Beside each woman's name was another name, the man who had loved her, followed by a single year, the year he had made his choice, the year he had walked into the sea. My eyes found Eliza's entry. Eliza Wren, 1861, and beside it, Thomas Wren, 1861. They had known. Both must have known about this place, this history. Eliza had known from the beginning that loving Thomas would lead to this end. Thomas had discovered it during his research after her death. They had chosen their path with full knowledge of where it would lead, and then I saw it, at the bottom of the wall, in stone that looked fresher than the rest, recent, perhaps only days old. The letters were rough, as if carved with a sharp rock, but clear enough. Samuel Winters, 186. The date was incomplete, the final digit uncarved, waiting, a space left blank for me to fill with my choice. Someone had carved my name in stone. Someone knew I would come, knew I would find the journal, knew I would become entangled in this story. Was it Eliza? Or something else? Some aspect of the consciousness in the deep water, preparing me for the role I was meant to play? I stumbled from the chamber, desperate for open air, for sky, for space not weighted with the expectations of the dead and almost dead. My heart raced. The cold that had settled in my chest after touching Eliza's hand now spread throughout my entire body, making my teeth chatter despite the mild temperature. I returned to the lighthouse and climbed to the topmost chamber where the great lamp had once burned. Through windows circling the space, I could see in all directions. Sea to the east, cliffs to north and south, dark pine forest to the west. This was where Thomas had spent his nights, tending the light, watching the sea, thinking of Eliza, where he had made his final decision, chosen love over life. I sat with my back against the cold lamp mechanism and tried to think clearly, but clarity seemed impossible. Every thought was colored by the cold in my chest, by memory of Eliza's touch, by the sound of her voice in the wind. The rational arguments against what I was being asked to do were overwhelming. I barely knew Eliza, had never known her. What I knew was a construct from a photograph, from old letters, from conversations with something that might be her ghost, or something else entirely. To sacrifice my life for this construct would be madness, but the counterarguments had their own terrible logic. What was my life? I had no family, few friends, a career ended in disgrace. I had come here to escape, to hide. If I walked away now, what would I return to? More years of quiet desperation, of professional obscurity, of the loneliness that comes from never having loved or been loved with real intensity. At least Thomas and Eliza had touched something transcendent. At least they had known what it meant to love absolutely, without reservation. They had paid a terrible price, but perhaps it was worth paying. The hours crept toward midnight. I watched the sun set spectacularly, painting the western sky orange and purple and deep crimson, like a wound in the heavens. I watched stars emerge one by one, and I watched the moon rise, full and enormous, casting silver light across the sea. At 11:30, I descended from the tower and gathered what I thought I might need: the journal, which I tucked into my coat, a lantern, though the moon was bright enough, and after hesitation, a knife from the lighthouse kitchen, sharp despite its age. The old records Thomas found spoke of blood sacrifice. I wanted to be prepared. The walk to the tomb took less time than expected, as if the path had shortened, as if the distance between lighthouse and stone vault had contracted in response to my need. The plateau was bathed in moonlight when I arrived, bright as day but leached of color, rendered in shades of silver and black. The tomb stood at the center, and the flowers that had appeared and disappeared now covered it completely, fresh and vibrant, their colors somehow visible despite darkness. Sea lavender and beach roses, the flowers of Eliza's wedding, the flowers of love and loss and promises transcending death. I set down my lantern, unlit, unnecessary, and approached slowly. "I'm here," I said quietly, "as you asked." For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind died to absolute stillness, and even the sound of the sea far below seemed to fade, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Then the flowers began to move, not blown by wind, but animated by some internal force, their petals turning toward me like faces. "Samuel Winters!" Eliza's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "You came. I wasn't certain you would. I couldn't stay away," I admitted, though God knows I tried to talk myself out of it 100 times today. "And yet, here you are." Her voice was closer now, emanating from the gap in the tomb's wall. "Brave or foolish, I have never been able to tell the difference." "What do you need from me?" I asked directly, tired of uncertainty. "Thomas sacrificed himself for you, dissolved himself into the sea, but you're still here, still caught between worlds. What did his sacrifice accomplish, and what more needs to be done?" Silence stretched out. When Eliza finally spoke, her voice was heavy with sorrow. "Thomas did everything right. His sacrifice was perfect, his love absolute. He became part of the deep, just as the old record said. And for a time, a brief, beautiful time, I could feel him there, could sense his consciousness woven into the water and wind. He was calling me, guiding me, trying to pull me back toward the surface. "But," I prompted, "but the power that claims us, my Father, the ancient thing in the depths, is stronger than we understood. It took Thomas's sacrifice and turned it to its own purpose. Instead of creating a bridge for me to cross back to the world, Thomas's dissolution became another anchor, another chain binding me to the deep. His love, which should have freed me, became another weight pulling me down." "Then it was all for nothing?" "Not nothing," Eliza said quickly. "His love sustains me, keeps me from dissolving entirely, from becoming fully what the deep wants me to become. Without him, I would have transformed completely decades ago. But with him, with his love anchoring me, I have been able to resist, to remain myself, or at least some version of myself." "Then what do you need?" I asked again. If Thomas's sacrifice wasn't enough, if his love became a chain rather than a bridge, then what can I possibly do that he could not? The flowers shivered. "You can do what Thomas could not," Eliza said. "You can refuse." I blinked, not understanding. "Refuse what?" "Refuse to sacrifice yourself," she said. "Refuse to love me. Refuse to throw your life away for someone you've never met, for a story that isn't yours. The power that holds me feeds on love, Samuel. It feeds on devotion and sacrifice and the willingness of humans to destroy themselves for the sake of the beloved. Every man who walks into the sea for one of us makes it stronger, makes its hold more complete." "Then why tell me all this?" I demanded, anger rising. "Why lead me here? Why show me the journal? Why let me touch you and feel what Thomas felt, if the only answer is to walk away? Because I need you to choose freely, Eliza said, tears in her voice. Thomas never had a real choice. He loved me too completely, too absolutely. From the moment we met, his fate was sealed. He would have done anything for me, and the power in the deep knew that and used it. But you, Samuel Winters, you don't love me. You love the idea of me, the romance of our story, the possibility of transcendent devotion. But you don't love me, not really. Not with the kind of irrevocable commitment that would make sacrifice inevitable, which means you can still choose. You can still walk away. And if I do, I asked, if I refuse to sacrifice myself, what happens to you? Another long silence. Then I will complete the transformation, without anyone to anchor me to the human world, without love to sustain my resistance. I will become what I was always meant to become, a daughter of the deep, a creature of the abyss, eternal and unchanging and utterly inhuman. I will forget Thomas, forget what it was to love and be loved. I will forget myself. But you'll be free, I said, free of this tomb, free of the pain of being caught between worlds. Yes, she agreed. I will be free. Free of everything that made me Eliza. Free of everything that made me human. I paced the plateau, mind racing. This was not the choice I had expected. I had thought she would ask me to sacrifice myself as Thomas had done. I had spent the day preparing for that decision. But this was far more cruel. She was asking me to choose between two impossible options: sacrifice myself and strengthen the power holding her captive, or refuse and doom her to lose everything making her who she was. There has to be another way, I said desperately. Some third option that frees you without requiring sacrifice, without feeding the power in the deep. If there is, I haven't found it in more than a century of searching, Eliza said. I stopped pacing and stood directly before the tomb, staring at the gap where darkness pooled like liquid shadow. Show yourself, I said. Fully. Not just your hand, not just your voice. I want to see you. All of you, before I make this choice. Samuel. Show yourself, I repeated more firmly. You're asking me to make a decision that will determine both our fates. The least you can do is let me see who I'm making it for. The darkness within the tomb began to shift and swirl, and something emerged from the gap. She was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Her form was translucent, neither fully solid nor fully spectral, flickering between different states of existence. Her hair flowed around her as if underwater, pale as moonlight, and her eyes were enormous, dark as the deepest ocean trenches. She wore the white dress from the daguerreotype, but it moved with her in ways fabric should not move, sometimes appearing solid, sometimes seeming made of seafoam and mist. Around her throat, the shell on its ribbon still hung, pulsing with faint bioluminescent glow. She was no longer entirely human, but neither was she fully whatever the deep wanted her to become. She was caught, suspended, beautiful, precisely because she was incomplete. This is what I am, she said, her voice resonating with harmonics human vocal cords could never produce. This is what Thomas's love has preserved and what his sacrifice has trapped. Do you understand now why I need you to choose freely? Why your decision cannot be made out of romance or fantasy? I looked at her, really looked, and saw not just beauty, but centuries of loneliness, of being caught between worlds, neither living nor dead. I saw the weight of waiting, of hoping, of clinging to memory of what she had been, while feeling it slip away year by year, decade by decade. And I saw Thomas in her, woven into her very being. His love had become part of her essence, sustaining her but also binding her, a chain made of devotion and sacrifice that she could neither break nor fully embrace. "What would you choose?" I asked. "If the decision were yours alone, if you could break free through an act of will, would you choose to complete the transformation and forget, or remain as you are, caught and conscious and alone?" She drifted closer, her form solidifying slightly, until she stood perhaps 3 feet away. I could feel the cold radiating from her, but it was different from the cold her touch had left in my chest. This was the cold of the abyss, of pressures and darkness human flesh was never meant to endure. "I would choose," she said slowly, "to have never been born half human, to have been fully one or the other. So I would never have had to make this terrible choice, never have had to sacrifice Thomas, never have had to ask the same of you." "But that's not an option," I said. "No," she agreed. "So instead, I choose to leave the decision to you, Samuel Winters. I have made enough choices, borne enough guilt. Whatever happens next, let it be on your head, not mine." It was the cruelest thing she could have said, to place the full weight of this decision on me, to make me responsible for her fate, while simultaneously telling me any choice I made would harm her. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps this was the test, not of my love, which was not really love at all, but of my character. I thought of Thomas, discovering that his love for Eliza had doomed them both, that the very intensity of his devotion would be turned against them. I thought of him making the choice to sacrifice himself anyway, knowing it would not accomplish what he hoped, knowing it would only create another chain binding Eliza. He had chosen love over wisdom, devotion over survival, and it had cost them both everything. I would not make the same mistake. "I refuse," I said clearly, the words echoing across the plateau, across the sea, perhaps across the centuries to reach Thomas wherever he existed in his diffused state. "I refuse to sacrifice myself. I refuse to feed the power that holds you, and I refuse to accept that these are the only 2 options." Eliza's form flickered. For a moment, she looked almost hopeful. "Samuel, listen to me," I continued, words coming faster, born of sudden inspiration or perhaps desperation. "Thomas sacrificed himself, and it didn't work because he was acting alone, trying to create a bridge using only his own love. But what if the solution isn't more sacrifice? What if it's less? I don't understand." "The power in the deep feeds on love and sacrifice," I said, pacing, thinking aloud. "It takes that energy and uses it to strengthen its hold. But what if we stop feeding it? What if instead of me sacrificing myself for you, I help you let Thomas go?" She recoiled as if I had struck her. "Let him go? Thomas is all that sustains me, all that keeps me from transforming completely." "Exactly," I said. "His love is a chain, Eliza. The most beautiful chain ever forged, but a chain nonetheless. As long as you're bound to him, as long as his sacrifice anchors you to this half-existence, you can never be free. Not truly free. But if I let him go, then yes, you might transform completely," I acknowledged. "Or you might not. You might find that without that anchor, without that weight pulling you both toward and away from the deep, you can actually move, can actually choose." I moved closer, close enough that the cold of her presence made my breath visible, close enough to see the swirling depths in her eyes. "Thomas's love was absolute," I said softly. But absolute love can become absolute possession, can trap the beloved even when it means to free them. Maybe what you need isn't another man to sacrifice himself for you. Maybe what you need is permission to let go of the man who already did. Tears, or something like tears, opalescent and glowing, began to roll down Eliza's translucent cheeks. "I can't," she whispered. "If I let him go, if I release his sacrifice, I'll forget him, forget us, forget everything we were to each other." "Maybe," I agreed. "Or maybe you'll finally be able to remember him properly, without the distortion of guilt and obligation and centuries of waiting. Maybe letting go is the only way to truly honor what you had." She was silent for a long time, her form flickering between states, between human and other, between memory and possibility. Finally, she spoke. "And you? What do you gain from this? Why help me at all if not for love, if not for the romance of sacrifice?" "Because I'm tired of seeing love weaponized," I said honestly. "Because I came here running from my own failures, and I found instead a story about how even the purest love can be twisted into chains. Because maybe helping you let go will help me understand how to let go of my own past. And because," I added more quietly, "someone should break this pattern. Someone should refuse to feed the power in the deep, should choose freedom over devotion, release over possession. If not me, then who? If not now, then when?" Eliza drifted back toward the tomb, her form becoming more ethereal. "I don't know if I can do what you're suggesting," she said. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to let Thomas go after holding on to him for so long." "You don't have to decide tonight," I said. "The moon will be full again in a month. That gives you time to think, to feel, to consider whether this path might lead somewhere better than the one you've been walking for a century and a half. And in a month, you'll come back. You'll help me if I choose this path?" "I'll come back," I promised. "Not to sacrifice myself, but to witness, to be present as you make your choice, whatever it might be. You shouldn't have to do this alone, Eliza. Thomas may be diffused into the sea and wind, but I am here, solid and present, and willing to help in the only way that doesn't feed the power that binds you." She nodded slowly, and I could see the weight of centuries beginning to lift from her translucent form, just a fraction, just the smallest easing of burden. "1 month," she agreed. "When the moon is full again. I will have my answer then." She began to fade, withdrawing back into the tomb, back into the darkness where she had waited for so long. But before she disappeared completely, I heard her voice one final time. "Thank you, Samuel Winters, for refusing, for choosing wisdom over romance, for seeing that sometimes love means letting go." And then she was gone, and I was alone on the plateau with only the flowers and the moonlight and the sound of the distant sea. I stood there for a long time, letting the weight of what I had done settle over me. I had not made the grand romantic gesture, had not sacrificed myself for transcendent love. Instead, I had offered something simpler and perhaps more difficult, the truth that devotion can become imprisonment, that the most loving act is sometimes to release rather than to hold. Whether it would work, whether Eliza would find the strength to let Thomas go, and in doing so free herself from the deep's claim, I could not know. But for the first time since arriving at Soromere Point, I felt as though I had done something genuinely helpful, rather than simply becoming another character in a tragedy repeating itself across centuries. As I walked back to the lighthouse, I felt the cold that Eliza's touch had left in my chest begin to warm, begin to fade. It did not disappear entirely. I suspected it never would, but it no longer felt like an invasion. Instead, it felt like a reminder, a small, cold truth nestled near my heart, reminding me that love, for all its beauty and power, must be tempered with wisdom, that holding on too tightly can destroy what we most wish to preserve, that sometimes the greatest act of devotion is to open our hands and let the beloved go free, even if it means losing them forever. I did not know what would happen when I returned in a month. Did not know if Eliza would choose transformation or continued imprisonment, release, or retention. But I knew that whatever she chose, it would be her choice, made freely, without the weight of another man's sacrifice adding to the chains that bound her. And that, I thought, as I climbed the stairs to the lighthouse keeper's quarters, was perhaps the only good that could come from this strange and terrible story. The only love worth having was the love that set free rather than bound. Everything else, no matter how beautiful, no matter how absolute, was just another form of possession. And the sea, the vast, hungry, ancient sea, would have to find another way to feed itself, because I refused to give it what it wanted. I refused to let love become a weapon. I refused. The month that followed was the longest of my life. I remained at Sorrowmere Point ostensibly to complete my cataloging work, but in reality because I could not bring myself to leave. The lighthouse had become less a workplace and more a vigil station, a place to keep watch while Eliza made her impossible choice in the darkness of her tomb. I saw Mrs. Coldwell only once. She arrived on a gray morning, 2 weeks after my midnight conversation with Eliza, her automobile struggling up the muddy road, her face pinched with concern and suspicion. "Mr. Winters," she said, standing in the doorway and refusing my invitation to enter. "I've received no progress reports. The Historical Society is beginning to wonder if this assignment was a mistake." "I've been thorough," I told her. "The place has more history than we anticipated." "Yes," she said, her eyes moving past me to the interior, to the stairs leading up into the tower. "This place has always had too much history. My family has lived in Sorrowmere Village for 6 generations, Mr. Winters. We know the stories. We know what happens to men who stay too long at the lighthouse." She looked at me directly then, genuine concern beneath the suspicion. "Leave this place," she said quietly. "Finish your work or don't, I don't care. But leave, before you become another name carved in stone, another cautionary tale we tell our children." "I can't leave," I said. "Not yet." I made a promise. "To whom?" she asked, though I could see in her face she already knew. "To someone who needs help." Mrs. Coldwell sighed, heavy with resignation and old grief. "My great-great-grandmother was one of them. Sarah Coldwell, 1756. That's why my family stayed in Sorrowmere Village, even though everyone else who could leave did so. We've been keeping watch, generation after generation, making sure no one else gets trapped by the same curse." "Then you understand why I have to stay." "I understand that you think you can help," she corrected. "But Mr. Winters, Samuel, no one has ever helped. The pattern has repeated itself for centuries. The sea takes what it wants, and love only makes the chains stronger. The kindest thing you can do is leave her to her fate and save yourself." "What if there's another way?" I asked. "What if the pattern can be broken?" She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw in her expression a war between hope and cynicism, between wanting to believe things could be different and the weight of centuries proving otherwise. "If you find another way," she said finally. "If you manage to break the pattern that has held for so long, then perhaps my family can finally stop keeping watch. Perhaps we can finally leave this cursed place." She paused at the threshold. "The next full moon is in 2 weeks. Whatever you're planning to do, whatever promise you made, that's when it will happen, isn't it?" "Yes," I said. "Then I'll return the day after," she said, "to collect either your cataloging reports or your body. I hope for your sake it's the former." She left, and I watched her automobile disappear down the road, back toward the village and the world of ordinary human concerns, leaving me alone once more with the lighthouse and the sea and the terrible knowledge of what awaited when the moon rose full again. The days passed slowly, but the nights were worse. I could not sleep more than an hour or 2 at a time. My dreams were filled with images of drowning, of walking into dark water that closed over my head, of Thomas's face as he dissolved into foam and mist. I would wake gasping, the cold in my chest flaring to icy intensity, and I would have to walk the beach in darkness to calm myself. During my nighttime walks, I sometimes saw Eliza. She would appear at the water's edge, translucent in the moonlight, watching me, but not approaching. We did not speak during these encounters. There was nothing left to say until the night of decision arrived. But I could see changes in her form, subtle shifts suggesting she was wrestling with the choice I had presented. Sometimes she appeared more human, more solid, as if she were pulling herself back toward the world of flesh and ordinary existence. Other times, she seemed to fade toward something else entirely, her form dissolving into mist and sea foam, her features becoming less distinct, more alien. She was testing possibilities, I realized, trying on different futures to see which fit, which felt like freedom rather than another form of imprisonment. And always, woven through her translucent form, I could see traces of Thomas, flickers of masculine features superimposed on her own, echoes of his voice in the sound of the waves, his presence like a watermark pressed so deeply into her being, it could never be fully erased. The question was whether she would continue to hold on to that watermark, allowing it to define and confine her, or whether she would find the strength to let it fade, to become fully herself, even if that meant losing the last tangible connection to the man she had loved. On the morning of the full moon, I woke early and climbed to the top of the lighthouse tower. The sun was just rising, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. From my vantage point, I could see for miles in every direction. The village of Soromir was visible as a cluster of buildings to the south, smoke rising from morning fires. The forest stretched westward, dark pine broken by occasional clearings. And to the east, the sea extended to the horizon, vast and seemingly infinite, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Somewhere in those depths, Thomas existed in his diffused state, his consciousness scattered across currents and tides, his love for Eliza woven into the very fabric of the ocean. Did he know what I was planning? Did he understand that I was going to ask Eliza to release him? I wanted to believe he would approve, that whatever remained of his human consciousness would recognize the wisdom in what I was proposing. But I suspected the truth was more complicated. Love like Thomas's did not want release. It wanted eternal devotion, eternal connection, regardless of cost. Even dissolved into the sea, even transformed into something no longer entirely human, Thomas's love would fight against being let go. But that was Eliza's choice to make, not mine and not his. I descended the tower and spent the day in preparation. I gathered what few possessions I had brought and packed them carefully. If tonight went as I hoped, I would leave this place in the morning, would return to Mrs. Coldwell with my cataloging reports and my resignation. I would go back to the ordinary world and try to build a life there, carrying with me always the knowledge of what I had witnessed, what I had refused, what I had helped to either free or destroy. As the sun set and the full moon began to rise over the water, I made my way one final time to the tomb on the cliff. The path was familiar now, my feet finding purchase on stones I had climbed dozens of times. The plateau, when I reached it, was transformed by moonlight into something otherworldly, every shadow sharp-edged and black, every surface touched by the moon glowing as if lit from within. The tomb stood silent and waiting, and the flowers that had appeared and disappeared throughout the month now covered not just the entrance, but the entire structure, a cascade of sea lavender and beach roses so thick the stone beneath was barely visible. Their scent was overwhelming, sweet and salt-tinged, the smell of weddings and funerals, of beginnings and endings. I set down the lantern I had brought and did not light it. The moon was bright enough. "Eliza?" I called softly. "It's time." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the flowers began to move, parting like a curtain, and Eliza emerged from the tomb. She was different than she had been a month ago. More solid, more present, but also more clearly other. The human and the inhuman aspects of her being had separated somewhat, no longer blurred together, but distinct, visible as layers superimposed on each other. I could see the girl she had been, pale-haired, dark-eyed, achingly beautiful. And I could see the creature she was becoming, something luminous and alien, something that belonged to depths where light and warmth were forgotten. "Samuel," she said, and her voice resonated with harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. "I have thought about what you said. I have thought about nothing else for a month, and I have made my choice." "Tell me," I said. She drifted closer, her form flickering between states, between possibility and actuality. When she spoke, her voice was steadier than I had ever heard it, stronger, as if the act of choosing had given her a solidity that centuries of waiting had eroded. "I choose," she said, "to let him go." I felt something in my chest release, some tension I hadn't known I was carrying. "Are you certain?" "No," she said honestly. "I am not certain. How can I be certain of anything when I have existed in uncertainty for so long? But I am willing. I am willing to release Thomas, to honor his sacrifice by no longer allowing it to bind me. I am willing to risk transformation, to risk losing everything I have been, for the possibility of becoming something freely chosen rather than imposed." "What do you need me to do?" I asked. She reached out her hand, that same translucent hand I had touched a month ago, and this time I took it without hesitation. The cold was still there, but it no longer felt threatening. It felt clean, like winter air, like possibility. "Bear witness," she said simply. "That is all. Watch what happens and remember it. Tell the story so that it does not disappear into silence and myth. That is the only help I need from you." She turned toward the sea, still holding my hand, and I could feel through that contact the immensity of what she was about to attempt. Thomas's presence was woven so deeply into her being that releasing him would require unmaking part of herself, would require severing connections that had sustained her for more than a century. "Thomas," she said, speaking to the wind and the waves, to the vast, diffused consciousness that had once been the man she loved. "I release you. I honor your sacrifice by refusing to let it continue to bind us both. I loved you, and I love you still. But I cannot carry your devotion anymore. It has become too heavy, and I am too tired." The wind rose suddenly, whipping her hair around her face. And I could hear in that wind something that might have been words, might have been protest or plea. Thomas, fighting against being let go, fighting to maintain the connection that had defined his existence for so long. But Eliza held firm. "Go," she said, and her voice was filled with love and sorrow and an iron determination I had not known she possessed. "Return to the sea not as sacrifice, but as release. Let your consciousness disperse fully. Become one with the currents and the tides, no longer bound to this place or to me. Be free, my love. Be finally, truly free." She raised her free hand and placed it over her heart, over the place where the shell still hung on its ribbon, glowing with that strange bioluminescence. With a sharp motion, she tore the ribbon from her throat and cast it into the air. The shell hung suspended for a moment, glowing brighter than I had ever seen it, and then it began to dissolve, breaking apart into particles of light that scattered on the wind. And with that dissolution, I felt through our joined hands the severance of the connection between Eliza and Thomas, the cutting of the chain that had bound them both. Thomas's presence, which had been palpable in the wind and waves, in the very air around us, suddenly released. I felt it rush past us like an exhalation, like the breath finally let go after being held for far too long. The wind carried it out to sea, dispersing it across vast distances, and I knew with certainty that Thomas Wren had finally, truly let go. His consciousness, no longer tethered to Eliza or to this place, could now dissipate completely, becoming one with the ocean in a way that transcended the tortured half-existence he had endured for so long. Eliza gasped and would have fallen if I had not been holding her hand. Her form flickered violently, shifting between states so rapidly it was dizzying to watch. For a moment, I thought she would dissolve entirely, would transform into the thing the deep wanted her to become, and I would have to watch her lose everything that made her human. But then she steadied. Her form stopped flickering and began to settle, to coalesce into something new. She was changing before my eyes, but not in the way I had feared. She was not becoming more alien, more other. Instead, she was becoming more integrated, the human and inhuman aspects of her being no longer fighting against each other, but blending, creating something that was neither entirely one nor the other, but a synthesis of both. Her translucence remained, but it took on a quality more like glass than mist, clear and solid and beautiful. Her eyes were still enormous and dark, but they no longer seemed to contain infinite depths. They were simply eyes, extraordinary but comprehensible. Her hair still moved as if underwater, but the movement was gentler now, less uncanny. She was, I realized, becoming herself. Not the human girl she had been, not the creature the deep had tried to make her, but Eliza, unique, unprecedented, free. "I can feel it," she whispered, wonder in her voice. "The transformation is completing, but not in the way they wanted. I am not becoming their creature. I am becoming something else, something that chooses." As I watched, her feet touched the ground for the first time in our acquaintance. Before, she had always floated slightly, never quite connected to the earth, but now she stood firmly on the stone of the plateau, grounded, present, real. "Can you leave?" I asked. "Can you leave the tomb? Leave this place?" She took a tentative step away from the tomb, then another. Her form remained stable, did not flicker or fade. A smile spread across her face, radiant with joy and disbelief. "I can walk," she said. "Samuel, I can walk." I can move freely for the first time in more than a century." She walked to the edge of the plateau and looked out over the sea, and I saw in her expression not longing or sorrow, but something like farewell. She was letting go not just of Thomas, but of the ocean itself, of the claim it had held on her since birth. "I can feel them," she said quietly. "My father and all the others in the deep. They are angry. They did not want this outcome. They wanted either full transformation or eternal imprisonment. But not this, not choice, not freedom." "Can they still claim you?" I asked, concerned. She was silent for a moment, considering. Then she shook her head. "No. By letting Thomas go, by choosing this freely, I have broken the pattern that gave them power. They can rage all they want, but they cannot force me to transform or to return. I am no longer theirs to claim." She turned to face me, and in the moonlight, she was heartbreakingly beautiful. Not with the unearthly beauty of the creature she might have become, but with the complex beauty of a being who had endured centuries of suffering and emerged transformed but not destroyed. "Thank you," she said, "for showing me that love can be release instead of possession, for refusing to sacrifice yourself, for giving me back my choice. What will you do now?" I asked. She looked around the plateau, at the tomb that had been her prison and chrysalis, at the lighthouse where Thomas had kept his vigil, at the sea that had claimed and tried to keep her. "I will leave," she said simply. "I will walk away from this place and never return. I will go into the world and discover what it means to exist without chains, without claims, without the weight of others' love binding me to the past." "Will you be able to survive out there?" I asked. "You're not entirely human anymore." "No," she agreed. "I'm not entirely human, but I'm not entirely other either. I am something new, something that has never existed before. And I will learn what that means as I go." She reached out and touched my face, her hand warm now rather than cold, solid rather than translucent. "Go home, Samuel Winters," she said gently. "Return to your ordinary world and build a life there. You have done more than enough for me. You have given me the gift of freedom, and I will carry that with me always." "Will I ever see you again?" I asked, though I thought I knew the answer. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Perhaps. The world is large but not infinite. If our paths are meant to cross again, they will. But do not wait for me. Do not make of me another chain, another weight. Live your life freely, as I will live mine." She stepped back and turned toward the path that led down from the plateau, not toward the beach, but toward the inland forest, toward the world beyond Sorrowmere Point. "Goodbye, Samuel," she said. "Thank you for refusing. Thank you for choosing wisdom over romance. Thank you for breaking the pattern." And then she walked away, her form solid and real, her footsteps making actual sounds on the stone. I watched her until she disappeared into the tree line, until even the faint glow of her form was lost among the shadows. I stood alone on the plateau for a long time after she left, watching the moon track across the sky, listening to the sound of the waves below. The tomb stood empty now, its flowers beginning to wilt, without Eliza's presence to sustain them. As I walked back to the lighthouse for the last time, I felt the cold that had lived in my chest since Eliza's first touch finally fade completely. In its place was warmth, a sense of rightness, of having done something genuinely good in a world that offered few such opportunities. I slept soundly that night, for the first time since arriving at Sorrowmere Point, and my dreams were peaceful, empty of drowning and dissolution, and devotion turned to chain. In the morning, I gathered my possessions and my cataloging reports and made my way down to the road, where Mrs. Coldwell was already waiting, her automobile parked in the same spot it had occupied on her last visit. She looked at me carefully as I approached, her eyes searching my face for signs of what had transpired. "You're alive," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "I'm alive," I confirmed, "and Eliza is free." "Free?" she repeated, disbelief and hope warring in her expression. "How?" "By letting go," I said simply. "By choosing release over possession, freedom over devotion." I told her the story as we drove back to Sorrowmere Village, told her about Thomas's journal, about Eliza's transformation, about the choice I had offered and the choice she had made. Mrs. Coldwell listened in silence, her hands tight on the steering wheel, her face unreadable. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Finally, as we pulled into the village, she spoke. "My family has kept watch for 6 generations. We have witnessed the pattern repeat itself again and again, have seen love turn to tragedy, devotion turn to destruction. We thought it would never end, that we would keep vigil until the sea itself dried up." She stopped the car in front of the Historical Society building and turned to look at me. "But you broke it," she said. "You actually broke it. Not by grand gesture or sacrifice, but by refusing to play the game the way it demanded to be played." "What will you do now?" I asked. She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I had seen from her. "Leave," she said simply. "My daughter lives in Boston. I've been wanting to join her for years, but I couldn't. Not while the watch continued, not while women were still being claimed and men were still being sacrificed. But if the pattern is truly broken, if Eliza is truly free, then my family's obligation is fulfilled. Go," I said. "Live your life freely, as Eliza will live hers." I left Sorrowmere Village that afternoon, taking the train back toward the city, toward the ordinary world of universities and libraries and scholarly pursuits. But I was not the same man who had arrived at the lighthouse weeks before. I had witnessed something extraordinary, had played a small but crucial role in breaking a pattern that had endured for centuries. More than that, I had learned something fundamental about the nature of love and freedom, about how even the purest devotion can become imprisonment if not balanced with the wisdom to let go. I did not know what had become of Eliza, whether she had found a place for herself in the world, whether her hybrid nature had proven to be blessing or curse, whether she had found happiness or merely traded one form of loneliness for another. But I knew she was free to make those discoveries for herself without the weight of ancient claims or eternal devotions binding her to the past. And that, I thought, as the train carried me away from Sorrowmere Point, was perhaps the most any of us could hope for: the freedom to choose our own path, to make our own mistakes, to become ourselves without the chains of others' love holding us back. Years later, I would occasionally hear stories from other scholars and travelers, stories of a woman who appeared at the edge of the sea in various coastal towns, beautiful and strange, who would speak to those who seemed lost or trapped by devotion, who would tell them that love should free rather than bind, that the greatest act of caring was sometimes to let go. I never knew if these stories were about Eliza or merely tales inspired by tales, the way stories proliferate and transform as they pass from teller to teller. But I like to believe they were true, that she had made of her freedom a mission, helping others find their own release from the chains that bound them. I returned to university, teaching eventually, to a position at a small college where my past indiscretions were unknown, or at least overlooked. I taught maritime history and literature, and sometimes, When the subject seemed appropriate, I would tell my students about the lighthouse keeper and his impossible love, about the woman who waited in a tomb for more than a century, about the scholar who refused to sacrifice himself, and in doing so, broke a pattern that had endured for ages. Some students thought it was merely a story, a Gothic romance invented to illustrate some point about devotion and obsession. Others sensed the truth beneath the narrative, recognized that some stories are too strange and specific to be entirely fictional. To those students, the ones who understood, I would show them the one artifact I had kept from Sorrowmere Point. Not Thomas's journal, which I had left with Mrs. Coldwell for the Historical Society's archives, not the letters or the daguerreotype, which belonged to Eliza's story and not to mine, but a single black feather, long and elegant, that I kept pressed between the pages of a book. Some loves, I would tell them, are so powerful they refuse to end with death. But the question we must always ask is whether that refusal brings freedom or creates a new form of imprisonment. The answer determines whether love becomes transcendent or merely tragic. And then I would return the feather to its place between the pages, would close the book and move on to other topics, other stories, other lessons. But I would remember, always. I would remember the lighthouse on the cliff, the tomb overlooking the sea, the woman who had endured a century of transformation and emerged free rather than consumed. I would remember, and in remembering, I would honor the truth that sometimes the most loving act is not to hold on, but to release, not to sacrifice, but to refuse, not to bind, but to set free. The sea still called to its daughters, still tried to claim those born of its depths, but the pattern had been broken at Sorrowmere Point, and word of that breaking had spread in ways both mundane and mysterious. Other women, in other coastal towns, began to resist their transformations, began to seek freedom rather than accepting imprisonment. Other men, loving these women, learned to offer release instead of sacrifice, wisdom instead of devotion. The change was slow. Patterns that have endured for centuries do not dissolve overnight. But change there was, spreading outward from that single act of refusal, from that single choice to break the cycle. The story was finished. The love that had been more than love had finally found its ending, not in tragedy or sacrifice or eternal devotion, but in release, in choice, in the simple and profound act of letting go. And that, I came to understand, was the only ending worth having. The only love worth keeping was the love that set you free. Everything else was just another form of drowning.